Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into Fyodor Dostoevsky's absolute masterpiece, Crime and Punishment, but we're going to look at it through a completely different lens. We aren't just going to treat this as your standard classic novel today. Instead, we're going to view it as a brilliant, incredibly meticulous scientific experiment. It's essentially a literary laboratory, designed from the ground up to test the absolute extreme limits of the human mind.
So, here is our roadmap for this little experiment. We're going to cover 1. The protagonist's divided self. 2. Transgression without conscience. 3. The theory at scale. 4. Refracting the Fuller system. And finally, 5. Refutation by demonstration.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, the protagonist's divided self.
We have to start with the core problem here. Our protagonist, Raskolnikov, is completely trapped in this unbreakable logical loop. This toxic idea that extraordinary men have the right to just step over moral boundaries. And because he literally cannot argue his way out of his own theory, Dostoevsky realizes he has to address this dangerous idea externally. To do that, he relies on a genius structural device, known in Russian as dvoinik, or the double. Now, we are not talking about supernatural doppelgangers or ghosts here, so don't worry. What Dostoevsky does is create a cast of characters who each isolate and embody just one single component of Raskolnikov's divided self. He takes an internal psychological schism and dramatizes it externally. He basically turns the people of St. Petersburg into walking, talking test subjects.
Think of Raskolnikov's mind as the primary hypothesis. The characters surrounding him aren't just random bystanders thrown into the plot for flavor, they're actually control variables and endpoints. Dostoevsky surrounds his protagonist with people who represent exactly what Raskolnikov would become if a single strand of his psyche was followed to its absolute logical conclusion. No other competing traits getting in the way. It's like, imagine taking your absolutely darkest thought and giving it its own human body. That's exactly what we're looking at.
Moving on to section 2, Svidrigailov, Transgression without conscience.
Svidrigailov is the terrifying answer to Raskolnikov's burning question of whether he truly has the right to step over that moral line. Svidrigailov actually tells Raskolnikov they're birds of a feather, and his established acts, they're horrifying. We're talking about the death of a servant, poisoning his wife, the horrific abuse of a vulnerable 14-year-old girl, relentlessly stalking Raskolnikov's own sister Dunya, and literally buying a 16-year-old fiancée. And, here's the kicker, he's never tried or convicted for any of this. So the absolutely crucial point here is that this is exactly what the extraordinary man theory looks like when guilt is completely subtracted from the equation. He experiences zero remorse. None.
Now you might be thinking, a guy like this has got to be tortured by demonic guilt, right? Well, no. Svidrigailov's characteristic state isn't guilt. It's just boredom. When he pictures eternity, he doesn't picture hellfire. He pictures a sooty village bathhouse with spiders in every corner. Just think about that for a second. It's this chilling, claustrophobic vision that reveals the mundane, suffocating emptiness of a successfully executed crime. The theory doesn't lead to greatness. It just leads to a small, dirty room. Forever.
But Dostoevsky refuses to make things simple for us. Let's look at Svidrigailov's final night. If he's purely evil, how on earth do we explain this sequence of events? He gives Sonya 3,000 rubles so she can afford to follow Raskolnikov's into exile. He financially provides for orphan children. He hands his teenage fiancée an absolute fortune. And decisively, when he finally has Dunya trapped in a locked room, he puts the key in her hand and lets her walk away. His conscience isn't entirely absent, it's just starved. It shows up way too late, operating completely without any moral belief system to guide it.
And this leads us to a pretty profound structural verdict. Notice how Dostoevsky sets up their final exits right side by side. Svidrigailov claims he is going to America, which is a euphemism he uses right before taking his own life. Total destruction. Raskolnikov, seeing this absolute dead end, chooses the other exit, Siberia. It's a harsh punishment for sure, but it's a punishment that actually permits a return to humanity. Dostoevsky places total destruction and redemptive punishment side by side, forcing us, and Raskolnikov, to really observe that choice.
Okay, section 3, Luzhin, the theory at scale.
So, Svidrigailov is this gothic extreme figure. But what if we take Raskolnikov's theory out of the shadows and dress it up in a nice, respectable suit? Enter Luzhin. He operates by a simple but frankly terrifying doctrine: love yourself before all others, because everything in the world rests on self-interest. To acquire for yourself is to acquire for all. When Raskolnikov hears this, he instantly recognizes it. It's his exact own brutal logic, just with the blood completely laundered out of it.
And honestly, because it's laundered, it's actually much more damaging. I mean, look at Luzhin's so-called respectable crimes. He intentionally seeks out a desperate, poor bride specifically so he can hold total tyrannical power over her. When he gets rejected, he literally frames a starving woman, Sonya, for theft by slipping a 100-ruble note into her pocket. And he does it purely to protect his own ego. The scariest part of all this? He's a highly successful lawyer about to open a public office. He breaks 0 laws that can actually touch him. Luzhin represents self-interest operating safely at scale. He is the version of Raskolnikov's theory that genuinely runs the real world, completely unpunished.
It's a brilliant bit of generational satire, really. Notice how Dostoevsky contrasts Luzhin, this middle-aged, sophisticated careerist who adopts progressive vocabulary just to flatter his own greed, against Lebeziatnikov. Now, Lebeziatnikov is basically this foolish young guy just parroting radical ideas he barely even understands. But when Luzhin commits his respectable crime, it's the buffoonish youth who actually steps up and performs the moral act of exposing him. Dostoevsky gives the fool the moral victory and the sophisticate the crime.
Which brings us to Section 4, Refracting the Fuller System.
If we only focus on Svidrigailov and Luzhin, we totally miss the true majesty of this literary architecture. Raskolnikov's psyche is actually refracted across a whole network of control variables. Take Razumikhin, for example. He has the exact same background as Raskolnikov. He's a poor student, same age, living in the same city, but he completely lacks the destructive idea. He tutors, he stays warm, and he finds ordinary happiness. He's the ultimate control variable. Then you have Sonya, who transgresses and destroys herself, but, and this is key, she does it for others, not over them, which preserves her soul. You've got Marmeladov, actively seeking his own punishment. Porfiry, who beautifully demonstrates intellect attached to a conscience. Mikulka, taking on false suffering. And Lizaveta, forever linked to Sonya by an exchanged cross. It's like a giant puzzle.
To really grasp how all these characters work together, we need to talk about polyphony. It's a concept famously identified by the critic Mikhail Bakhtin. See, Dostoevsky doesn't just step into the book and give you a boring authorial lecture about why murder is wrong. Instead, he creates these totally independent consciousnesses. The philosophical argument of the text is constituted by their very lives. He never just tells you the theory is false, he populates the entire city of St. Petersburg with its living, breathing consequences.
But hold on a second. As we analyze this whole experiment, we gotta ask a pretty critical question. Did Dostoevsky cheat? Did he stack the deck? I mean, after all, he needed Svidrigailov, the guy who crossed over without guilt, to fail. So what does he do? He supplies him with hallucinations and a pistol. A skeptic might easily say, hey, real-life Svidrigailovs don't always shoot themselves. So is this just the author forcing a moral victory?
Let's find out in Section 5, Refutation by Demonstration.
Let's take a look at the final dataset and see exactly how perfectly this laboratory resolves. If you have an idea without conscience, like Svidrigailov, it leads to suicide. If you have self-interest without conscience, like Luzhin, you get moral vacancy. If you have a conscience without that destructive idea, like Razumikhin, you end up with an ordinary, good life. And if you transgress for another person, like Sonya, you get the survival of the soul. It's brilliant. Dostoevsky meticulously dismantles Raskolnikov's theory by visual demonstration. Nobody out-argues Raskolnikov. They just live out the endpoints of his ideas right in front of him.
And circling back to that whole stacked deck accusation regarding Svidrigailov's death, actually there's a much better defense here. Svidrigailov isn't destroyed by the sting of guilt, he's destroyed by the sheer exhaustion of desire. Remember his vision of eternity as that boring, spider-filled bathhouse? He literally has no project, nowhere left to go. The argument isn't that conscience magically swoops in and punishes everyone. The argument is that a life organized entirely around unchecked human will simply runs out of content. It completely exhausts itself.
Which leaves us hanging with one final, super provocative thread. If Svidrigailov, this monster of a man, was capable of those final acts of genuine generosity, funding Sonya, letting Dunya go, is he truly the pure endpoint of the extraordinary man theory? Or is he, at the end of the day, just another messy, deeply divided human being? Perhaps Dostoevsky's laboratory ultimately proves that there is no such thing as a pure theory in the human heart. It's a living debate, entirely unmixed and incredibly messy. And honestly, that is exactly what makes diving into this literature so endlessly fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly, highly encourage you to go explore the laboratory of this incredible novel for yourself.